As you can imagine, living in a world that doesn't give you any kind of option or framework to be who you are and to understand who you are, feel celebrated for who you are, can really mess you up. Hello, and welcome to the Out and Bloom podcast. I'm your host, Eva Bloom, queer and transsex educator, late bloomer coach, and community facilitator. I am so excited for you to be joining us here today. The Out and Bloom podcast is all about using social psychology to help you make sense of your late bloomer journey, feel empowered, and also a little bit less alone in this wild and chaotic world that we have going on right now. When I'm not working supporting late bloomers, you can find me reading a queer sci-fi or fantasy novel, starting a new craft project, or playing board games with friends. There are new episodes of this podcast out every week. Stay tuned for episodes on queer fashion, second adolescence, queer books, media, music. Please subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. If you want more late bloomer community support, advice, book recommendations, please feel free to join the Late Bloomer Support Club over on Patreon at patreon.com/Late Bloomers Support Club, where we meet monthly on the first Monday of every month and have an amazing and beautiful Discord. Link to join the Late Bloomer Support Club in the show notes and in the description. This episode is a biggie. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Today we're talking all about Comphet, aka compulsory heterosexuality. And you know, as a lesbian who came into my identity as an adult later in life, I am well familiar with Comphet. We're going to be talking about the impacts on Comphet and the way that it can make the journey to you understanding your sexuality a little bit more complicated, add some roadblocks, and also talking about how to heal from Comphet in a really deep and beautiful way. So off the top, what is Comphet? Comphet stands for compulsory heterosexuality, and it's a term similar to cis heteronormativity. You might have seen both thrown around, but it's basically the idea that we live in a society that assumes that everybody is straight and cis. And from the time you're born, you get a little pink or blue ribbon put on you as a baby. You're assumed that, the genders say what your gender is going to be, and also they say who you are going to want to date, marry, all that stuff. You're really put on a little baby conveyor belt to be like, okay, have a nice straight life. And at every point in your life, from, the kids' books that you read, the TV shows you watch, the expectations that your parents might have about what your future might look like, in big ways and also small, subtle ways, most of us are told by society at large, if not our parents, that it's assumed and that we should be straight and cis. And Comphet really speaks to the way that this impacts queer women, non-binary people, trans people in a unique way based on the way that gender operates in a Western society. Comphet comes from an essay from 1980, which, if you've heard from Comphet from the Lesbian Masterdoc, which had a huge resurgence in 2020, it's been around for a long time, which comforts me a little bit to know that lesbians, sapphic people, we've been thinking about this stuff for a while. We are not reinventing the wheel to be like, they don't want us to be gay, Nowhere was I told this is something that's okay for me, or maybe I wasn't really encouraged in a lot of big ways. So yes, from this essay in 1980 by Adrienne Rich. Adrienne Rich is not perfect, but I think it can still be helpful to take some of her different teachings and use them to understand ourselves. The essay was called Compulsory Heterosexuality and the Lesbian Existence. So really speaking to the gendered element of it. But Comphet doesn't just impact lesbians. Comphet impacts everybody. If you are a lesbian, if you're bi, if you're pan, Comphet impacts queer men too. This idea that it's assumed that we're cis and straight and that we should be impacts everybody in different ways, but it is absolutely not an exclusive lesbian paradigm or experience. I was really lucky to grow up in a big, metropolitan, very queer-friendly city in Toronto in Canada. And even still, Comphet got me in a lot of different small ways. So some of the examples, you know, as a person who grew up in the 90s and early 2000s, in the era of the Disney princess, there are no sapphic Disney princesses. There are no models of what it can look like to have a crush on a girl, to have a girlfriend, to, get married and grow old with a woman, to have kids. And that, start from the jump in terms of the assumption that, okay, to be a little girl, you are going to want to date little boys. And the way to be happy and fulfilled and what you should want and strive for in life is to get married from these, very pivotal Disney princess movies. I also had the experience that a lot of lesbians will relate to of just, arbitrarily picking a crush, picking a guy crush when, you're going around the schoolyard in elementary school and saying, oh my gosh, who do you have a crush on? As it was coming around to me in the circle, I was like, okay, think of a boy, name one boy's name, just in my head. And I picked Daniel Radcliffe, and then somebody in the circle said it before me. And I said, well, that was my choice. And I don't know any other pieces of media, so I'm kind of out of luck here. I also want to talk to the way that Comphet really speaks to a gendered experience, not to, dismiss or downplay the way that queer men are oppressed or experience pain or hurt or aren't represented in the media as well. But I think there's definitely a double standard, especially in the early 2000s. There was a little bit more representation for queer men in the media. Of course, not all perfect, but lesbians as a whole were largely excluded from popular media. We didn't even get the opportunity to be like the cool gay best friend. And I found that in my personal experience and life growing up too. Like I said, really lucky to live in a pretty progressive city. My first job was babysitting for a gay couple, but even then I really didn't put the pieces together of oh, these are two gay men who have a kid and babysitting and awesome, you can be an adult and be gay. But specifically around a sapphic experience, I really didn't see any models of adult sapphics being happy and living their lives. So it was really hard for me to imagine my future when society was really not presenting it as an option or as a path for my experience socialized as a girl into a woman. Queerness was not given as an option in that schema. When we think about the way that Comphet messes with sapphics in particular, I really find it helpful and also brings up many different emotions of rage and grief and sadness to think about the way that as a society we intertwine the idea of being a woman and heterosexuality. It is so intertwined. Even, from Disney princesses, we are taught that as a girl and then into a woman, the happiest day of your life should be the day that you get married to a man. And it's a very specific picture of what that could look like. You bond with your friends about crushes on boys, and then as you get older, you bond with coworkers about what guys you're dating and who at the company is attractive. And there really is this idea of good womanhood being around how well you can perform heterosexuality. There is this sense of morality put on queerness, whether or not you grow up in a religious community or background, in which case that might be very explicit, or even beyond that, just in society as a whole. This idea that, okay, to be a good woman is to be heterosexual, that queer women are predatory or dangerous or weird, uncool, angry, difficult to be around. And I think we've had some great strides in terms of media representation, in terms of changing that narrative and giving more examples of positive sapphic representation and what it can be to be sapphic in a positive light just within the past couple years, which isn't very many, but still, especially, growing up, the only representations for me were like Ellen DeGeneres, Rosie O'Donnell, and both of these people were really seen as like kind of a joke. You weren't like, oh my gosh, like Ellen and Portia, what like couple goals? Oh my gosh, they're so beautiful, they're so cool. That was not what we were thinking. And as with like all of these things, it's related to fat phobia, it's related to racism in terms of how different groups are representative. And throughout time, the acceptable lesbians in media or positive examples of lesbians in media have been white, thin, cis lesbians. And that's changed a little bit, but not that much. That is to say that part of Comphet is the idea that good womanhood means heterosexuality. And to step outside that, you are being deviant or bad in some way. And for a lot of us getting that message growing up, that's a really terrifying message to hear. And as a young person, you're like, of course I want to be good. Of course I'm a good person. I want to do good things in the world. I don't want to hurt people. I want to help people. So within that framework, a lot of us just don't see queerness as an option. Like it's literally just like blinders on, like not even something that we're closeted. It's not even something that we see as a possibility because it just doesn't fit into the narrative of who we are and who we're told that we can be. This idea of, compulsory, and also the idea that we are told that we're going to receive like social punishment for falling outside of that path. In many ways, Comphet following in heteronormativity is about survival for women. Many years ago, women couldn't like open a credit card or a bank account by ourselves, or like would have to get approval or permission from our husbands to do things. It is up until very recent history that so much of women's access to autonomy and freedom was associated with being married or romantically connected to a man. And that still exists today in a lot of different places, in a lot of different ways. So following the path of heteronormativity, not questioning or realizing that you're queer, is about survival. Even, just like flirting with somebody to like get a job, which in a capitalist society, you literally like need a job to survive. So I want to really extend so much compassion to you if you didn't realize that you were queer until later. If you were put on that, those little escalators in the airports that are flat and you walk down them. If you were put onto that escalator of heteronormativity or Comphet and you said, okay, I guess this is just kind of happening to me. This is what is assumed. Okay, I guess this guy's kind of cute enough. I'm going to date boys. I like want social approval from my friends. I want to be seen as a good person. And I guess this is what's happening. And at no point do you kind of stop and think and give space for your queerness that exists. On a more lighthearted note, Comphet, I think, is also a great way for talking about how we weren't given frameworks or structures for understanding our queer desire. Again, bringing it back to Disney princesses, without any examples of what a queer crush could look like or what it would look like to have a girlfriend or a wife, it's really hard for our imaginations to understand and label what's happening to us. You're like, oh, well, I just really am obsessed with this new girl in my class. I just want to be around her all the time. Or my stomach does this weird thing when my friend braids my hair. Well, I don't know what that's about. But if you're literally never given any examples of what that means, of course, you're not going to put the pieces together and say, oh, I have a crush. We make up these new frameworks and oh, it's just, I really like this friend or blah, blah, blah. Because we literally don't have examples for our queerness or our sapphic identity or experiences. In terms of my own experience of being put on that airport conveyor belt of a heteronormativity or Comphet, I was in a long-term relationship with a cis man for 3 years. Has been my predominant romantic experience. And, when we broke up, I didn't immediately say, whoa, oh my God, all these like gay thoughts that I've been having, I like understand that I'm like queer, I'm a lesbian. No, I wasn't on to like for many months, like have casual sex and hook up with men. It's so easy to just be like, well, this is what I'm supposed to do. I'm getting validation from it. Maybe it's fun. It like, feels nice to flirt with somebody. That's a fun thing. And just go down that treadmill, that conveyor belt. So again, want to give you so much compassion if that was also your experience. And also if it was your experience that you did have some understanding of, I think I'm queer, I think these feelings that I'm having are gay, but it feels scary to address those, or it doesn't feel like there's a path forward for me that I can follow to explore that and still feel safe and true to who I am. Big compassion if that was your experience too. As you can imagine, living in a world that doesn't give you any kind of option or framework to be who you are and to understand who you are, feel celebrated for who you are, can really mess you up, can really lead to some not nice, internal experiences. I know for me, that looked like a lot of internalized queer phobia and shame. It wasn't until I started realizing, first identifying as bisexual and then as a lesbian, as I started to understand that about myself, really unearthing a lot of self-hatred that I didn't know was there in the ways that I had internalized without knowing that maybe I was bad or wrong in some way because I had absorbed those messages from society and started to believe them. A lot of sapphics can also develop a lot of harmful coping mechanisms to deal with living in an anti-queer world and negotiating that internalized queer phobia or shame that you're experiencing. A big one for me and for a lot of people can be this idea of overcompensation in some way, that there's some part of us that feels like, okay, there's a part of me that might be harder to love. There's a part of me that I might have to apologize for to other people. So in other areas of my life, how can I make myself as perfect as possible? How can I make myself as palatable as possible, as less uncomfortable as possible? Because I know that if or when one day I choose to share this part of myself that might be harder to love, it'll be balanced out by those other things. Or in some way, do I have to earn people's love because there's a part of me, my queerness is maybe more scary or challenging for people? For me, that looked like perfectionism, workaholism, really devoting myself to school and work and not really having any type of life outside of that in order to get perfect grades or for other people to approve of me, and also to avoid these things maybe I don't want to think about myself. Comphet can also lead us to be really disconnected from our authentic selves. If every day you are quieting a part of yourself, or you are not listening to your body's authentic cues of attraction and desire or connection with others, if you're saying, no, that isn't real, I don't feel that, or I'm not going to listen to that, it can really prevent you from building that mind-body trust or connection in other ways of your life, which can lead to some really scary situations. And then also unpleasant situations of literally just like not knowing who you are and not knowing what you like. For me, that impacted me in terms of friendships in a big way. I feel like it hasn't been until my adulthood and since re-coming out as a lesbian and non-binary that I've actually started to develop deep, meaningful friendships. Because for a lot of my life, elementary school, high school, even university, I was not being my full self. There were parts of me that I was ashamed of, that I felt like I couldn't fully exist in who I was. And if you can't fully exist in who you are, then other people don't get to know a truly deep, authentic version of you. And you don't fully open up to them either. So yeah, there is some of that grief to watch people who have been able to be fully authentic with friends their whole life and really develop deep friendships. And I'm not saying that you can't have that as a late bloomer sapphic person. I know a lot of people who have that, which is really beautiful. But for me, I feel like I'm literally just learning now. I'm like, oh, this is what it's like to be a good friend, have real friendships. And also part of that is unlearning being a workaholic and actually having the time to devote to healthy friendships too. And I want to say that with that feeling disconnected from friendships meant that I felt very lonely a lot of my life, which I want to name because I think the weird thing about loneliness is that we feel so alone in our loneliness. And I felt that so much. So if you feel lonely or have had long periods of your life where you felt very alone, I want to say that I've been there and you're not the only person that has experienced this. And it doesn't have to be your whole life. With that, talking about healing from Comphet is a very big and important endeavor for so many of us. So that can look like reconnecting with your pleasure and then also your desire. I remember when I was first coming out again as a lesbian and non-binary, I would literally write lists in my journal about who am I? Like, what do I like? Which feels really silly to have to think about, okay, what are my hobbies? What are my favorite ice cream flavors? Like, what do I like to do with my time? But spending so much time saying, oh, these queer parts of me, I'm making it too much of my personality. It's annoying that my queerness takes up such a big part of my life. That's like weird. All these things that I like are weird. Doing that so much and having that become like second nature in my brain to start unlearning that and being like, okay, if we turned off the self-judgment, if we turned off this voice saying what was right or what was wrong about myself, what are the things that actually make up who I am? And that was a process and a journey of understanding that and then allowing myself to be myself and engage in things that bring me joy. Also on a, physical sexuality level of rebuilding that connection between your body and your brain, allowing yourself to begin to understand maybe what arousal feels like in your body, allowing yourself to experience desire without shame, to, be attracted to queer hotties. That's a beautiful thing. That's not a creepy or a weird thing. It's okay to want that. And allowing yourself to be in intimate situations and experience that pleasure and know that that's not shameful or wrong or weird or you're like can receive as well. I know for a lot of late bloomers, if we've had early experiences with men, it can be very much about performance and giving to the other person potentially. I know a lot of people who are also, it was about being a starfish and I'm just receiving. But either way, unlearning the performance aspect of intimacy, that you can actually be in your body, that you can be present, that you can be led by what feels good, as opposed to just, okay, I'm going to do XYZ trick because that's going to get the person off and end of the situation, or I will be doing what I need to do based on what Cosmo and society has told me I should do, performing or doing sex. That's an unlearning process too. Finding community is also a really huge way of healing from Comphet. I know for myself, having those first conversations with other late bloomer lesbians when I was first coming out literally felt like water in a desert. It was so needed. It felt so soul quenching to talk to people who were not only queer, but who had had this specific experience of maybe not knowing that they were a lesbian, dating men potentially, and coming into their lesbian identity or queerness into adulthood. Really made me feel less alone and helped heal a lot of the different aspects of what I was going through in that process. Building community and friendships was a big way that I unlearned the unhealthy coping mechanism around workaholism, but also just like learning how to rest, learning how to take weekends and like experience pleasure was a huge part of unlearning that and healing from Comphet for me as well. Really learning how to sit with myself and not always feeling like I had to be doing something or being productive to avoid being in my body or being in my thoughts, to actually enjoy life and exist in my body. So wild. Welcome to the second part of our show, What I'm Loving Right Now, where I share all of my favorite things that I am reading, that I'm listening to, that I'm cooking, and some creators that I love, and other people who are doing cool queer shit in the world. First, let's start with what I'm reading right now. And I'm very proud to have started a nonfiction book club with my friends. And our first book club pick was Emergent Strategy by Adrienne Marie Brown. And it was a freaking hit. And I would say if you are doing some mindset shift, if you are unlearning things in your world, I would highly recommend Emergent Strategy as a way of rethinking how you approach building community, being human, navigating the chaos of the world. If you're unlearning Comphet, Emergent Strategy is also probably very helpful. Literally, since reading it, me and everybody in the book club has just been like calling out Emergent Strategy in our lives all the time, which rocks. In terms of what I'm listening to, I have been listening to Orla Gartland's album from last year, I think, but it's releasing a deluxe edition, Everybody Needs a Hero. It is just some good, like poppy, rocky, fun times. I'm doing some D&D in the Late Bloomer Support Club, and I put her song Little Chaos on our D&D playlist for playing a rock punk band of pixies. I'm playing the barbarian of the group, of course. We're smashing on the drums. Gorin Thistlespring and Ferocity are what in the same. In terms of what I'm cooking, I feel like I've not been very creative or inspired in the kitchen lately, but one thing I'm forever grateful is that one of my roommates is a lover of some good sourdough bread, and they get bread on the app Too Good To Go, which is also sustainability, helping make sure that bread doesn't get thrown out when it's maybe not perfect or gonna expire soon. You can go to people like us who are gonna eat that delicious sourdough bread in record time. So I'm very into that lately and always. Good bread is good for a good life. And then what creators I'm obsessed with loving right now, I would say Bi Astrology, which is a bi-positive meme affirmation celebration page by Charmaine. She uplifts a lot of Black bisexual movers and shakers in the world, celebrating the Black bi experience in general. And I think if you're a bisexual person who's unlearning Comphet and you want support and celebration, I would really recommend you check out her page. And that brings us to the end of this episode of Out in Bloom. If this episode's made you think, I guess I've been impacted more by Comphet than I thought I was, please feel free to hit subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you listen to your podcast. And if you also have a friend who's navigating coming into their queerness, send this episode along to them and help them feel less alone and make sense of their experience as well. If you want more community support around being a late bloomer, please join the Late Bloomer Support Club over at patreon.com/Late Bloomer Support Club. We have monthly meetings that are themed on a different topic. We recently did a topic all about Comphet, first Monday of every month, and we also have a Discord open 24/7. As well, if you go to a college or university and you would like more inclusive sex ed brought your way, sex ed that's actually relevant to people of all genders and sexual orientations, I would love to come on by and speak. Feel free to check out evabloom.ca/work with me and drop me a little inquiry. We can chat. But that's all I have for you today. Stay curious, stay bloomin', and I'll see you in the next episode. Bye!